You're never too young to have your heart broken. Many decades later, I would learn that neither are you ever too old to have your heart broken. I stood in the shower under the hot water crying for Bonnie, my lost love. I was in 3rd grade and Alan, my former best friend, had apparently decided to dedicate his life to ruining mine and became my worst enemy. I studied, and Alan never did. One afternoon, I wouldn't let him copy the answers from my paper on a spelling test. Then our grades came back and Alan flunked. Miss Taylor, our teacher suggested that he could get grades as good as mine if he actually studied. Alan had always been the golden boy, top dog, the recipient of never-ending praise, and this was his first criticism. I was used to criticism and disapproval. Hell, I wouldn't have even understood any praise if anyone ever gave it to me. With his ego shattered, Alan ran out of the classroom crying. He was furious and held it against me even though I'd done nothing wrong, as far as I could see. I was the shortest kid in our class. Alan was the tallest. He was a lot better looking than I was, but I was a lot smarter than he was. He was rich, I was poor. After school, he challenged me to a fist fight. I explained that though he would win, I would break his nose, and then he would no longer be handsome. That stopped him in his tracks. He said it wasn't worth his time to fight with me because everyone knew I was a bastard. He sneered and walked away. This was the first, but not the last time I was called a bastard. I didn't know what a bastard was, but it didn't sound good and I didn't want to be one. Bonnie had been my girlfriend since kindergarten. You really like Bonnie, don't you? Alan asked during recess a few days later, with a mean smile on his face that I didn't yet understand as the two of us walked over to the water fountain where Bonnie was drinking. Yes, everybody knows that. I answered. Well, she isn't your girlfriend anymore. She's mine. You may be smart, but you're ugly. Alan asked Bonnie who her boyfriend was, and she said that Alan was now her boyfriend. Alan called me a loser and laughed in my face. I was crushed and ran away before I started crying. I could have taken the school bus home, but I didn't want anyone to see me crying. So I walked the 2 miles with tears streaming down my face. I was out of breath when I reached my front door. When I poured out my heart at home to my older sister, she shocked me. Why would any girl want you if she could be with Alan? He's tall and incredibly handsome. If he was older, I'd go after him myself. I thought that was the ultimate betrayal until my mother chimed in that I had to realize that I wasn't handsome or tall, that unlike Alan, I had no personality, and if I was lucky, I would go through life maybe being a girl's 2nd, 3rd, or 4th choice, but never first. I didn't cry, or even get angry. I realized that I would have to make my own way in life alone. It was also the last day that I loved Bonnie, my older sister, or my mother. My parents were divorced and I wanted to live with my father. He often took my sister places, but never took me. He bought her presents, but there were never any for me. I phoned him and asked if I could live with him and not my mother. He dropped a bombshell. He was sorry. I was a nice boy, but I wasn't his biological son. Neither he or my mother ever figured out who my biological father was. He called my mother a tramp. I had to look that up in a dictionary along with bastard. I wasn't as broken up as perhaps I should have been upon learning that I really was a bastard. It made sense because everyone always treated me like I was a despicable person even though I had done nothing wrong. Some children weren't even allowed to play with me because of my parentage. I was made to feel guilty just because of how I was born. I asked my mother who my father was. She claimed that she didn't want to discuss it. When I kept asking, she slapped me in the face and ordered me never again to mention it. I was just so numb inside that I didn't even cry or scream. I didn't think my pain through in philosophic terms. I was much too young for that. Instead, I decided that I hated them all so much that I wouldn't let these jerks ruin my life, and in fact I would have a great life, just to show them what fools they were and how they should have been nicer to me. It took me many years until I met my wife Susie and again trusted a woman. After the debacle with Bonnie, I started reading and tried to forget my pitiful life and live vicariously through the heroes in the comic books I read. Then as I learned to read better, for a few hours I would lose myself in novels. I was a brave English secret agent holding a beautiful woman with one hand, while saving the world from destruction with the other. The rest of the time I was either an astronaut surrounded by beautiful women or a World War II fighter pilot who was loved by a USO movie star. Reality had no allure or appeal to me. Why should it? Eventually I began losing myself in the classics, which for some reason I came to love more than the trashy novels I had been reading. I had to keep a dictionary next to me to decipher the big words that I didn't know. The happiest moments of my childhood were spent lost in a novel or a movie. I guess it shouldn't be a surprise to discover that I became a professor of classical literature at a local community college. Occasionally I also taught a class on comic books and their effect on juvenile culture. That was also the subject of my master's thesis. I claimed that children's moral perspective was in large measure based on the comic books they read. If their friends also read and love the same comics, it further cemented these notions of right and wrong. Some English departments thought my thesis frivolous. Perhaps that's why no four-year college would hire me, only the local community college. At a job interview, one department head suggested that I should have written a thesis on how the works of Chaucer affected children. I replied that for each child who read Chaucer, 1,000,000 read comic books. Big surprise, I didn't get that job. A month after Bonnie dropped me for Alan, Alan dropped Bonnie, who tried to crawl back to me during recess, but I refused to ever again speak to her. In 4th grade, I walked to school every day with Olivia. One day she wasn't there. Her mother informed me that she walked to school that day with Alan. So much for Olivia. Of course, Alan dropped her after 2 weeks. She was crushed. She really liked him. Insanely, she expected me to offer her consolation and empathy when she told me what happened. Instead, she received only my laughter. By now, even I understood Alan's motivation and game plan. In 6th grade, I had a birthday party at a local ice cream parlor. Naturally, I didn't invite Alan, but he learned of the party and showed up. Despite my warning to Carol, the same scenario occurred and she left with Alan. A few weeks later, she tried to come crying on my shoulder about how much she loved Alan and how he broke her heart. The stupid bitch expected sympathy from me. Alan and I attended different high schools. I went to Central High. It was a magnet for smart kids. There I met Linda. I thought I was safe from Alan's attack, but I was wrong. I don't know how he learned I was dating Linda, but one day when I asked her out, she explained she was now dating Alan. Alan's father was a wealthy dentist. He cheated on his wife repeatedly and she divorced him. Though Alan's sister lived with their mother, Alan lived with his father, who bought his son a Porsche sports car and expensive clothes to make amends. I wore jeans and t-shirts. My mother had very little money, so I traveled by bus. Now, why would a girl prefer to go on a date with a boy in his Porsche instead of traveling by bus with me? It was one of life's mysteries to absolutely no one but me. I believed that it wouldn't matter to a decent girl. I never met a girl like that. At 15 or 50, every man sometimes plays the fool for a woman. It's the nature of the beast, though it did seem to happen to me more than most other guys. Iris was my girlfriend from 15 to 16. Of course, I trusted as well as loved her. You may be thinking, what can a 15-year-old know about love or trust for that matter? When we were 16, I took Iris ice skating to the local rink. I didn't know that Alan worked there. We had a great time, even though Alan flirted with her as we put on our skates, and he skated circles around us. He was easily twice my size. If he had tried anything, though, I would have gone ballistic on him. I didn't care how much he would hurt me. I would hurt him too. Alan saw the look on my face when he tried to skate with Iris and skated away. It was a smart move on his part, since he would probably have lost his job. He operated the ice cleaning machine. It's called a Zamboni, and all the girls swooned over him. Iris and I were walking home, crossing an icy street, when a car slid out of control on the ice and veered towards us. I could have easily gotten away from it, but I didn't. I grabbed Iris' arm and pushed her out of the way of the car to safety. I was hit by the car and woke up hours later in a hospital, with casts on one arm and one leg and a headache from hell. I was in the hospital for 2 days and Iris visited me both days. I felt like her hero. I thought every girl wanted a hero, but I was wrong. Iris criticized me for being a klutz and not also getting to safety in time, even though I explained that I put her safety above my own. She didn't seem to grasp it. I needed to use crutches for several weeks and took Iris to the movies while hobbling. She seemed embarrassed to be with a gimp. The next Saturday, she claimed to have the flu and couldn't go to a movie with me. I didn't want to go without her. I decided to show my affection and concern for her. I went to a delicatessen and bought a gallon of chicken soup with noodles for her. I put it in my backpack and hobbled to her house 2 blocks away. I rang the doorbell and her mother let me in, with a look of pain or surprise on her face. Just then Iris walked down the stairs with her hair fresh from the hairdresser and lots of makeup. She wore a prom dress and looked at me in horror. She screamed that I had no business being there and to get out. The doorbell again rang. It was Alan in a tux. Tonight was the prom at his high school. As Iris walked past me, I took the top off of the chicken soup container and poured it on Iris' head. I watched with glee for a second as the noodles slowly dripped down her face, smearing her makeup and ruining her dress. Alan punched me in my face. I was so consumed with rage that I didn't even feel it. I lifted my right crutch quickly into his groin. With 10 years of pin-up anger, I dropped my right crutch and hit him in his stomach with a right hook. As he doubled over, I kicked him as hard as I could in his left knee, and he went down as I quickly left the house. I didn't expect lifelong love and gratitude for saving Iris' life, but neither did I expect to be stabbed in my back 2 weeks later. Though we continued to run into one another in high school, Iris and I never again said a word to one another. My divorced mother had little money, so I went to a local college and lived at home. I heard that Alan went to an expensive party college for dumb rich kids 1,000 miles away. I had grown over 6 inches in the past 2 years, and though Alan was still taller, I was no longer a shrimp. I had always been a bookworm. It was a lot cheaper than the psychological therapy which I desperately needed but couldn't afford. I worked at the college library and met Susie, who was 2 years younger than I, and who was also a bookworm. Everyone called her Susie Q after the song. We lunched together discussing Proust, Kafka, and finally I blurted out how badly I wanted to kiss her. She leaned forward and our lips met. Despite Bonnie, Olivia, Carol, and Iris, I knew in my heart I could trust my heart to Susie because I had an ace up my sleeve. I was absolutely positively sure I would never lose her to Alan. We dated from September to Christmas, and I had never been so happy in my life and let down my guard for the first time since I was 8 years old. It felt wonderful. Happy was a strange feeling that I rarely experienced. I introduced her to my family, and my mother, never a tactful person, or someone who held me in high esteem, blurted out that she never thought I would find a girl that pretty who would like me. Then with a puzzled look, my mother asked Susie what she saw in me. Susie took my hand and explained that not only did she think I was cute, but unlike all the other men she knew, she could trust me with her heart because I wasn't an uncaring, egocentric, cheating jerk. I was so happy I almost cried. My mother was shocked that a girl could love me. I think it destroyed her worldview. My father divorced my mother because of her repeated cheating. It was just one more reason that I hated her. Susie's mother left her father because he had cheated. This was part of the bond that joined Susie and me. We both agreed that loving someone you couldn't trust was lunacy, or maybe even impossible. Love without trust was just an illusion, a fantasy with no real substance. I took those words to my very heart, and I thought Susie also had. I was sitting at Dave and Harry's sub shop during Christmas break, waiting for my cheese steak, when Alan and 3 of his friends sauntered over to me. "Hey, loser," he taunted. "I hear you have a new girlfriend who's a real skank. I can't wait to meet her and take her away from you. Then I'll be intimate with her and let her know what a real man is like after she's been intimate with you. I hear she's a real bitch." While Alan was busy berating me, he was unaware that my new girlfriend stood behind him. "Well, Alan, I'm going to marry this girl, and I don't think she wants to jeopardize that with a moron like you." Alan folded his arms. "There isn't a girl on earth who would go out with a poor, ugly bastard loser like you that I can't take away. Not this time, idiot. I found one who already hates your guts and you can't date." "What's her name?" "Susie," I responded. "She's standing behind you." Alan turned and my new girlfriend slapped him hard across his face. "Watch who you call a skank, big brother," his sister Susie said as she sat down next to me. "You're as big a jackass as our father." Alan was at a loss for words, and while bent over silently, he walked away while he coughed. Susie and I have been married for over 40 years. We only saw Alan during Thanksgiving dinner at my mother-in-law's. I always thank him for winnowing away all the unfaithful two-timing losers I liked and clearing a path for Susie and me. Thanks to his help, I was able to figure out the difference between a lady and a tramp, so I was ready to appreciate Susie when we first met. Once after we both drank a lot of bourbon, I asked him why he devoted his childhood to tormenting me. He smiled and said he did it because everyone loved him and despised me so he could get away with it, and it was so much fun. He considered it his hobby. Alan was divorced for the 3rd time already. He had a son and a daughter, neither of whom would talk to him or have anything to do with him. That broke his twisted, self-centered heart, which surprised me. He was really good at starting relationship, but not so good at maintaining them. Few women wanted a cheating husband, no matter how handsome he was. What really pissed me off about Alan was that he got in on cryptocurrencies on the ground floor and made a fortune, which he enjoyed rubbing my face in every Thanksgiving when we all dined together until his death 6 months ago. I guess you could say that even after his death, Alan found a way to mess me up with one last parting shot. It was a coup de grace. If he was in hell and looking up at me, I knew he was happy at my misery. Other than my wife Susie, my standard 50-pound French poodle, Vesta, is my best friend. She's warm, loving, adorable, and loyal. She's smart as a whip, well-trained, and also the best private eye around. Now I call her my private eye pooch. Like most people, I talk to my dog. Unlike most people, I also listen to my dog. While walking her, she dragged me to the house of my cheating wife's boyfriend, though at the time I didn't know it. Susie and I are both over 60. We met in college. We have been married for over 40 years, so I never dreamt that my wife would start to cheat on me now. Of course, there was that one suspicious incident 35 years ago with our next-door neighbor's movie star handsome brother, and another possible one-night stand with her personal trainer 20 years ago, but I never had any proof, and though I chalked it up to my paranoia, I always kept my eyes open. Susie's best friend since junior high school, Lynn, was so beautiful she could sleep with any man she wanted, and she did. She also died of AIDS about 30 years ago. I thought that was one of the major reasons for my wife to remain on the straight and narrow. The other was her fear of herpes. I think our marriage was number 3 on her list. I thought we both loved and cared about each other. She took care of me after my hip surgery, and I did the same for her after her knee surgery. This behavior may not be what teenagers consider to be what true love and marriage are all about, but I think it's the definition of true love for people over 50. At this age, I spent more time taking care of her while she was in bed sick needing help than when she was in bed needing intimacy. Before we retired, we both taught English literature at a nearby community college. Now I just volunteer to tutor students at the local high school and help them fill out their college applications. I also take my dog to local old-age homes once a week to cheer up the residents. Most of what I do there is listen to the residents tell me stories of their beloved pets who died decades ago. I don't mean to sound like a Pollyanna, but bringing joy to so many people, with so little effort on my part, brought a lot of joy to my heart as well. When Vesta was extra special nice to someone in the rest home, I knew that person would soon die. Vesta could smell it and made a fuss over that person. Have I mentioned that other than Susie, Vesta was the kindest and most compassionate female I'd ever known? My weakness now that I was retired and had a lot of free time was watching gangster movies. I had almost memorized the dialogue in the first 2 Godfather movies. I must have watched each 100 times. I thought the third one was a dud and only watched it 20 times. Though Susie taught literature, her passion or weakness was reading cheap romance novels, where the handsome, ostensibly poor young stud sweeps the much older widow off her feet and takes her to a lavish villa and vineyard in Tuscany where she discovers he's a wealthy Italian nobleman. Can you imagine believing such bullshit? She spent the last year trying to write one of these trashy novels about a 60-year-old cookbook writer and her young Italian lover. The working title was A Taste of Tuscany. When I asked her if it was about oral sex, she didn't laugh. She was learning Italian, so she could write some of the dialogue in that language. The writing hasn't gone well, and she kidded with me that she needed to do some personal research in the field with a young stud. I didn't think she was serious, but I didn't think the comment was funny. When I look at her, I still see the 18-year-old girl I fell in love with. She's still beautiful to me, but everyone else sees an overweight 60-year-old grandmother with a wrinkled face, big bum, and thick glasses. 6 months ago, her brother Alan died in the saddle, so to speak. Surprisingly, it wasn't because of a jealous husband, but a bad heart. Perhaps insensitively, I said to his sister that I was shocked to learn that he even had one. Now, of course, that he was dead, she loved him and thought him perfect, and she was furious with me. I was flabbergasted by her doing a 180 after all these years of despising her brother. Though I don't think he planned it that way, only because he wasn't that clever. His death exacted his most insidious and devastating revenge on me. He left his sister, my wife, a shitload of cryptocurrency in his estate, after which everything in our marriage went downhill in free fall. My wife was using Tony, an attorney, to sort out the tax consequences of the inheritance. Our longtime attorney and friend Barry had retired, and 40-year-old devilishly handsome Tony inherited us. He spoke a few words of Italian to my wife, and while that made me groan, it convinced her to hire him. He didn't strike me as any more of a jerk than any other lawyer. I was wrong. Not all lawyers are jerks. This one was. I would soon find out. My late father was an honest, moral, ethical lawyer. That's why he barely made a living, and my mother had to also work even before they were divorced because of her cheating. Except for my wife, all the women in my life cheated on me. Even though he wasn't really my dad, he often gave me good advice. He once told me that most lawyers are paid to lie, cheat, and steal from their client's adversary. A lot of lawyers also lie, cheat, and steal from their clients. Before he rejected me because he wasn't my bio dad, I loved and respected him so much and cried because he didn't act that way towards me. He's been dead for over 40 years, and his treatment of me still hurts. After he spent $100 on my sister's Christmas present, would it have killed him to spend $5 and buy me one too? Hell, he hadn't even put any coal in my stocking. I don't think I'm a stark raving lunatic, but with the way I was treated during my childhood, I think I would have the right to be nuts. Somebody said the pain which doesn't destroy you makes you stronger. Well, if that's true, I must be Superman. A photograph of Tony's wife, Trudy, a fashion model and centerfold, sat on his desk. She appeared to be way north of high maintenance. She looked like it must be exorbitantly expensive to keep her happy. I didn't think a lawyer's salary was sufficient. You'd have to be a rock star or something to support her. Fortunately, it wasn't my problem. The walls were festooned with posters of Ferraris and Formula One race cars, which Tony said he dreamed of one day owning and possibly racing at Le Mans or some such racecourse. He had already chosen a name for his fantasy race car, Volare, which my wife explained meant, "It flies," in Italian. My dream was for my wife and me to just lie down on a tropical island beach in the hot sand, with a couple of cold tropical drinks in our hands with a breeze off of the ocean to cool us down. I didn't need a Formula One race car. My 15-year-old BMW 3 Series was fast enough for me. In truth, it was really too fast. My reflexes aren't what they once were. Honestly, nothing about me was like it once was. That's the price you pay for getting old, but I didn't complain. I had too many friends who lived their whole lives in great shape because they died so young. I certainly wasn't jealous of them. At our age, my wife and I were used to the deaths of close friends. It seemed to occur about twice a year. We never got over it and never completely recovered from it. For 30 years, when she heard a funny joke, Susie would phone her friend Judy to repeat it. From habit, she did that last week, forgetting for a moment that Judy had died last month. My wife had a crying fit for an hour. These deaths affected me a lot, but they affected my wife a lot more. She obsessively worried about how much longer she had to live. No amount of comforting from me helped her. She sobbed that she was sick of her boring life and wanted some fun, excitement, and adventure before she died. She began singing a very old song from the 1950s about living life to the fullest. It was called, "I'm Going to Live Till I Die." Looking back, I think that was the moment I lost my wife. The first thing my wife did with her brother's money was to trade in her 6-month-old Toyota Camry for a new bright red convertible Porsche 911 because she claimed she deserved and could now afford newer and better. She called it her Babe Mobile. I suggested she buy a Mercedes, but she said that was an old lady's car. Then she got a nose job, a facelift, and her butt and boobs medically or magically lifted back up to where they were 40 years ago and enhanced with a ton of silicone to a size that was ridiculous. I could hardly recognize her. Honestly, it was not an improvement. The surgeries didn't make her look younger, only harder, but I kept my mouth shut because I would never hurt her feelings. Imagine a cheap new paint job on a battered and dented 1957 Chevy Bel Air with too many miles on the clock and too much junk in the trunk. When I told her I was afraid she'd trade me in next, she told that maybe I should up my game. She just laughed when I asked what game we were playing. Then I became very worried that I would be traded in next, especially since she now always came up with excuses not to be intimate with me. She had more headaches than an actor in a Tylenol commercial. Every other day for the last 6 months, Susie would try to look like a 20-year-old, spending an hour putting on makeup and fixing her hair. Then she'd put on hot yoga pants with a running bra to walk our dog for a few hours. She would return home tired but happy and run into the shower. However, our dog was suspiciously not tired out by these supposedly 2-hour walks. Our neighborhood is just one street, about 2 miles long. While walking, our dog ignored everyone's house except ours, my sister's and my son's houses. As we'd walk past those houses, she'd run up the stairs to their homes because of their familiarity. She never climbed the stairs to strange houses. My wife used to go to the hairdresser once every few months. Now she went every week. One cloudy day, my wife had a hairdresser appointment, and I walked our dog down one side of the street and up the other. I was surprised when she ran up the stairs of a stranger's house. At least the owner was a stranger to me. I made a mental note of the address and socked it away, hoping never need that information. It certainly put me on my guard, but that wasn't enough for me to confront my wife. And besides, if anything was going on, I didn't want to put her on her guard. She didn't go out for girls' nights with her friends. She didn't hide her cell phone or change her password or make secret phone calls. There were no strange numbers on her cell phone or home phone's bills, mostly her sister, our children, her estate lawyer, and the local pharmacy where we unfortunately spent too much of our money on prescription medicine for my wife's high blood pressure, diabetes, eye condition, depression, and over-the-counter painkillers. That night I sat down with Susie and 2 glasses of expensive French champagne in front of the fireplace with Frank Sinatra singing, all the way. I thought it was pretty romantic. "Susie, you've seemed so distant lately. Is anything wrong between us?" Susie sipped her champagne. "No, I'm just stressed by all this estate business." Relieved, I leaned in to kiss her, but she moved away. "Why are you attacking me? I'm not in the mood," she responded, and I knew I was in trouble. Since when was kissing my wife an attack? The last time she refused to kiss me was in 1991 when, unbeknownst to me, she had a toothache. I thought of various ways to unearth the truth. After her next walk, should I pull her panties from the hamper and examine them for any trace of him? No thanks. Should I hug and sniff her for men's cologne when she came through the door? I tried that, but she pushed me away, claiming she was too sweaty. I thought of putting on a mask or disguise and following her on her next walk, but I had no need to stroll around looking like Groucho Marx or the Lone Ranger. In anticipation of her walk, the next day I opened and activated the Find My app on her iPhone. That way I could track her whereabouts. The next day after she left for her walk, I opened the Find My app on my iPhone and discovered that she left her iPhone in her dresser drawer. She had outsmarted me. Okay, the first set went to my wife. Undeterred, I bought an Apple AirTag and placed it on my dog's collar hidden by a ton of fur without telling my wife. 2 days later, my wife took the dog for a walk. I gave her a 20-minute head start, and then I tried to track our dog. I turned on the iPhone app and discovered that the tracker was 20 feet away. I hit the Make a Noise button and discovered that my wife had removed it and put it in her dresser drawer, next to her iPhone. Score 2 to my wife, but the game wasn't over. Well, high-tech hadn't worked, maybe my private eye pooch would. I drove down to the house my dog had previously alerted me to. I walked up to the door and pushed a large planter next to the door. Standing on my toes on the planter, I peered through the small glass window on the top of the door and saw an empty living room. I yelled out, "Vesta, speak, Vesta, come." And my dog let out a loud series of barks. Vesta came running to my voice, pulling my naked wife and her naked estate lawyer, who both tried to cling to her leash. To give the devil his due, her lover had a pretty large tool. I knew now what she saw in him. I also knew that her money was what her lawyer saw in her. The lawyer, a man in his 40s, was a partner in a large firm. I was amazed how my 40 years of loving her evaporated in 1 second. Of course, I took photos with my phone. I opened the mail slot at the bottom of the door, painfully knelt down on my arthritic knees, and yelled inside, "You can keep that cheating bitch. I'm divorcing her, but let out my dog or I'll break down the sliding glass door on the side of the house and beat the shit out of you for dognapping." I heard the sliding door open, then quickly close as my dog ran into my arms, licking my face as if to tell me, "I told you so." I'm glad my bluff worked. I'm in no condition to beat up anyone, but I knew that I would have my revenge on that jerk lawyer no matter what it took, no matter how long. He had destroyed my marriage and I would destroy his life, though not with a baseball bat, as tempting as it felt. Susie's brother, that son of a bitch Alan, had indeed had the last laugh on me and destroyed my marriage with his money. I took my dog and drove to the beach, where I cried for most of an hour while throwing a stick for my dog to catch. I returned home and made an appointment with a divorce lawyer, then loaded up my SUV with a lot of my stuff and my dog. I phoned my oldest son and asked for 2 favors. 1, could I stay there for a few days, and 2, could he refrain from asking me why? Then I cried for another hour. I cried for my lost marriage, and I cried for being a fool. Mostly I cried about my uncertain future. I don't want to be 60 and single. I don't know how. I had never wanted to know how. My wife had inherited the house from her late father, so it belonged to her. But I would have left anyway to escape all the memories it held. My soon-to-be ex-wife returned home a few hours later. "Why?" I asked. She smirked. "Let me be brutally honest with you. I'm 60 years old with high blood pressure and diabetes. Who knows how much longer I have left? Now that I'm rich, why would I waste my remaining years with a 60-year-old pasty white, bald, decrepit old man with arthritis in his knees? You can no longer ski or bike or play tennis with me," she answered. "I'm rich now and I can afford younger and better, so I've traded you in for a newer, shinier model, just like when I traded in my Toyota. You've always been a great husband, but now I want younger and better. I deserve younger and better, and frankly, now I can afford younger and better. It's nothing personal." Nothing personal, I thought? Is she out of her mind? Does she think she's Tessio from The Godfather one? I've never won a disagreement with my wife, so I didn't waste any time trying to argue, especially since her characterization of me was spot on. I asked her how many other men she had slept with during our marriage. "Only 4, she answered, with no shame on her face. Susie was a cheater through and through. "So, you're a cheater just like your brother and your father. Well, unlike you, at least I know who my father is," she said, driving the knife deeper into my heart. I wanted to call her an idiot, but that would end the conversation and not get me anywhere. While we're being brutally honest with each other, once your boy Toy gets his hands on your money, how long do you think he'll be hanging around with Susie the Floozy, a 60-year-old grandmother? "He loves me," she said, more to convince herself than to convince me. "And when I look in the mirror, I can see that I don't look my age." I took off the Coke bottles masquerading as her eyeglasses and cleaned them on my shirt and held them up to the light as I gazed through them. "The problem is that you need new glasses. You're no longer Susie Q. Your new theme song is from the Everly Brothers. Wake up, little Susie, wake up," I said, and I left. I staggered onto the street, weak in the knee and weak in my mind. I hadn't just lost my wife. I had also lost the guiding philosophical star of my life. I had believed to my core that if I was a good husband, a faithful husband, a loving husband, that I would be rewarded with a wife who acted the same towards me. Looking back, I couldn't think of anything I ever said or did to my wife that merited this situation. I felt like such a damned fool for turning down propositions a half-dozen women made to me over the years. Some people can get away with lying and cheating. I was never one of those people. I never wanted to be somebody like that. When I even looked a pretty student walking 100 feet away from me on campus, my wife immediately knew the next time she saw me. I have the opposite of a poker face. If I had ever cheated on my wife, she would have sensed it within minutes of my return home. If she hadn't, I would most likely have immediately fallen on my knees confessing and begging forgiveness. I've always been amazed how some people can be such talented liars that they get away with it. It was not a talent that I possessed or even wanted. I'm not claiming that I never told a lie. I'm not George Washington, but I think I'm like most people. I prefer and enjoy being honest. I don't have to remember a bunch of different versions of stories or which lies I told which people. It makes my life easier and less stressful. With my knees the way they are, stairs are my mortal enemies. I rented a ground floor, dog-friendly condo in a complex filled with 60-year-old divorcees and widows. I filed for divorce. I'm not Catholic, but I contacted the equivalent of my local priest, Father Peter O'Malley, the owner and bartender at O'Malley's Irish pub. I confessed my sins and my problems. He prescribed 2 bloody Hail Marys and a newer, younger, hotter woman. The first part of Father O'Malley's prescription only gave me a headache and a hangover. The next day, after the hangover subsided, I went to the cannabis store. I bent the ear of the saleswoman with my sad story and asked her which brand of MJ would alleviate my anguish. She sold me some cannabis-infused gummies and sent me on my way. I returned home and took a gummy. I rummaged through some moving boxes and found an ancient Jefferson Airplane album and an equally ancient turntable, which I carried back to the living room and installed. About an hour later, as the cannabis hit, I was devouring chocolate chip cookies and singing along with Grace Slick. I thought I sounded great, though my dog disagreed and howled in pain, trying to cover her ears with her paws. Yes, Grace, you're right. One pill does make you larger, and I do need somebody to love. While stoned, I fantasized about my wife phoning and begging forgiveness. Would I be noble and take her back, or think only of my male ego and say no? I couldn't decide. Strangely, the worst part of the experience was hearing her say, "It's nothing personal." I felt like Tessio, one of Michael Corleone's enemies who knew he would soon be rubbed out. I played with the idea of following Susie's lover and ambushing him with a baseball bat. I calculated the slim odds of getting away with it. Besides, he's too young and strong, plus I don't want to go to jail and miss watching my grandchildren grow up. My children told me they wanted to disown their mother, but I talked them out of it. She may be a lying, cheating bitch, I thought, but out loud I said, "She's still your mother, your suddenly very rich mother." Susie and I divorced. Because she was so rich, even before she sold her house, she gave me our savings and didn't attack my 401k. Financially, I made out rather well, but it didn't make me happy or satisfied. I'm a very petty person, and I needed revenge on both of them for humiliating me and destroying not only my marriage, but my faith in humanity and justice. It kept me up night after night. I understood that her lawyer would steal her money and dump her. I almost felt sorry for her, but upon further reflection, I reveled over knowing that. Everyone, but my wife, knew that. Our children tried to resurrect her sanity but telling her that, but she merely ignored them and threatened to cut them off financially. To their credit, they ignored her threat and continued trying to bring her back to reality. It was a lost cause. They were also smart enough to know that her threat to disinherit them was ridiculous. When her boyfriend was done with her, she would have no money to leave to anyone. Sleeping with a client is a no-no for lawyers in California. I filed a complaint with the Bar Association. Then I sued the son of a bitch and his firm for malpractice and breach of fiduciary duty. At the insistence of the firm, his malpractice insurance carrier settled out of court for enough money for me to buy the condo I was renting with some left over, and he was disbarred. Every day I hit the gym at the complex. I'm still bald, because I thought I looked stupid wearing a wig. I still have arthritis, but I've lost weight and gained muscle. I'm no longer pasty white because every sunny day I'm out at the community pool working on my tan with my dog, who is a babe magnet. I had better luck with the second part of Father O'Malley's prescription. I'm casually seeing Megan, a widow in her early 50s, whose children are grown and whose arthritic knees are as bad as mine, which was the gist of our first conversation. Once again, my dog Vesta saved the day. Megan also has a standard French poodle, Valley. We met while we both walked our dogs, and both had to sit down on a bench because of arthritic knee pain. That led us into an informed but heated disagreement on the relative merits of Advil versus Tylenol versus Aleve on knee pain. It was a far cry from the many discussions I had about different kinds of drugs while I was in college. I guess relationships have started over things even sillier than that. Neither of us ever want to marry again or even live together, which is great. I guess some clouds have silver linings. Because we both have arthritic knees, we can't play tennis, ride bikes, or hike together. All we can do is make love, and we do that a lot. After we make love, one of us walks, or more honestly hobbles 100 feet away to their own apartment. I introduced Megan to cannabis gummies with an ice cream chaser, after which we both act like horny teenagers. We're not madly in love with each other, but we like each other a great deal, and more importantly, we trust one another, and we're comfortable with each other. At my age, that's a lot. Thank goodness I didn't have to resort to singles bars or online dating. I could just imagine what I would have posted. Single 60-year-old decrepit, bald, arthritic man with his own teeth, seeks beautiful younger woman with firm body and her own teeth. Lots of luck with that, I mused. It wasn't a pretty picture. At least online dating would spare me the face-to-face humiliation of a singles bar, where I would be old enough to be the grandfather of everyone else there and couldn't even dance. My ex-wife's lover was of course fired and supposedly left his wife. He and my ex-wife lived together for 3 months or so. According to my children, during their European vacation to meet some of his aunts and uncles, she bought him a Ferrari at their factory in Maranello, Italy, while they stayed nearby at a bed and breakfast at a vineyard in Tuscany, where she completed her romance novel, A Taste of Tuscany. I could only imagine which part of her lover she was tasting in Tuscany. As I had discovered, it was pretty big. I hoped she choked on it. Within 2 weeks, she sold the novel to a New York publisher. They traveled to Switzerland, where she bought him a solid gold Rolex watch at the factory store in Geneva, with the money from the sale of her novel. He convinced her to bankroll him in a crypto business centered in Basel, Switzerland, which she did. Surprise, surprise, there was no business. He just ran off with all of her money and reunited with his wife. Susie was burnt in Basel, left in Luzerne, and totally swindled in Switzerland. My children informed me of this, even though their mother had sworn them to secrecy. If I was a better person, this would have made me sad. I'm not that wonderful and at first laughed my butt off, but knowing how her boyfriend broke her heart broke my heart again. I guess when you've loved someone for so many years, it's hard to turn it off, but I'm working on it. I no longer daydreamed about wreaking revenge on my ex-wife. She managed to mess up her own life. Much worse than I could have imagined. Much less accomplished. I wouldn't even call it karma. It was so obvious and so inevitable that only a self-deluded fool couldn't have seen it coming down the pike at 100 miles an hour towards a head-on collision. Like the Beatles philosophically pointed out and my ex-wife ignored, can't buy me love. Though I had taught college courses in 19th century poetry, the Beatles, along with Paul Simon and Bob Dylan, were my favorite poets. I think the answer to most of life's questions are entwined in their lyrics. My favorite songs are Sounds of Silence by Paul Simon, Yesterday by Lennon and McCartney, and of course the song that had unfortunately defined my life since my wife left me, Desolation Row by Bob Dylan. Later Susie phoned me. She wasn't aware that I knew her boy dumped her and left her penniless. When she finished writing her novel, she said she got the May-December obsession out of her system and came to her senses. She said she wanted us to be together again because I was the only man she ever loved. She proclaimed her eternal love for me. Except I thought for the last year. She said we shouldn't throw away 40 years over the one little mistake she'd made. Little mistake, I said. Then what the hell do you consider a big one? I asked. She asked if we could start over and make our marriage even better. I pointed out that we were no longer married. Then I had a maniacal idea. I told her I would take her back if, in order to prove her goodwill and remorse, she first sent me a check for $25,000. She began crying and said she shouldn't have to prove her love with money. I told her I was feeling generous. Send me a check for $5,000. She finally admitted that her lover had stolen all of her money and she was destitute. I thought of some incredibly cruel things to say but held my tongue. Though she and her brother always enjoyed humiliating people, I never did. I gave out an involuntary laugh. I guess it's true. I responded to her, there's no fool like an old fool. I knew you must be flat broke to have the guts to phone me. She was so broke that she sobbed as she asked if Elle would lend her some money to return to the United States because of the 40 good years we'd had together. She said that had to be worth something. I calculated what those years were worth to me, minus the betrayal, and wrote her a check for 40 cents, one for each of our years together. That made me feel like a jerk. So I tore up that check and mailed her a check for $1,000 so she could buy an airline ticket back to the States, Then I blocked her on Facebook, my iPhone, and my email accounts. I included a note that said, "This isn't a loan and it isn't a gift. I'm paying you to never again contact me. I've traded you in for Megan, a younger, thinner, prettier model with a firmer, all-natural silicon-free body. But like Tessio said in Godfather 1, it's nothing personal." Dear listeners, sending loads of love to Ronald Burns for his contribution, and to all our listeners, thank you for being part of this literary journey with us. You can check out Ron's work at Amazon, and we have shared the links in the description box below. And if you want to share your work with us, please send your work at the email mentioned in the description box, and we will publish it for our listeners at Lost Love Chronicles. Please share your thoughts in the comments section, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.